All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. As regular subscribers and viewers to this channel know, I host a vast array of eclectic conversations with people all over the map in the world of music and otherwise. I've always been someone who's open to varying opinions and varying viewpoints. I'm also a journalist who started his career at the time when the belief was still that a journalist can present a story and a news item without necessarily endorsing said news item. So I'm approaching this conversation in that way. A situation came up over the last few days. I wanted to present on this channel as a way to set some records straight. So with that fairly lengthy preamble out of the way, it's my pleasure to welcome from the anti-heroes, Mr. Mark Noah. Mark, good to see you here, sir.
Howdy, how are you?
Doing all right, doing all right. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. To give a little bit of background for the viewer, as some viewers know, I was in a band called Broken Heroes down in New Jersey when I still lived there, back in the 90s and again in the early 2000s. And a few days back, the band's Facebook page posted a meme, I guess we'll call it, that's been going around with respect to Mark, your band, the Anti-Heroes. My friends in Broken Heroes posted that image, basically decrying it, we'll say, and speaking in support of your band. So I just want to, I have it on my phone here. I want to call it up quickly so I can read it in full so people know what I'm talking about. Um, so the meme has your logo, the Anti-Heroes logo with the circle and the line through it. And it says, fuck white power bullshit, rebranded as RAC crap, being marketed as populist rock. Hope these clowns try to come to LA, London, and Glasgow. Interesting image. My immediate thought was, wait, the anti-heroes are white power? That's news to me because we would play on some bills back in the 90s, and I certainly didn't walk away feeling that was your band's position, but okay. So, my philosophy is if the guys in Broken Heroes support somebody, that person they're supporting is at least worth a shot and a fair shake. So I wanted to have you on to talk about what's going on. So let's get right into it, man. Let's talk about this meme that's going around, and I'll just start with a simple question. What the hell's going on with that?
That's a great question. I'll tell you exactly what's going on with that. and as a preamble, the anti-heroes started in 1984. We're old guys now, but we were young guys then. We wrote 5 records that are all different. They, are part of different parts of our lives. And recently we wrote a record called Devil at My Heels that was released at the end of last year that a fan called me and said, that's the right record at the right time. And so that's kind of the juxtaposition of your answer. But in the 80s, when we started the Anti-Heroes, the first guitar player, who was a super good guy, and ended up getting not one but 2 PhDs in electrical engineering, was Jewish. And when there was, probably from like 1984 to about 1987, the oi scene in America was really thriving. And then around 1988, you started to see a bunch of the people breaking off of the traditional type of oi music and getting into this extremist, white power stuff. And there was a natural conflict between us and them. And they used to, around 1988 to 1989, they used to come down to our shows and assault us, and we used to throw down against those guys regularly. And we all have the scars. And so in that context, we all went on to live great lives and raise families and do stuff like that. But the anti-heroes have never been in any way like a racist band or a Nazi band or anything like that. In fact, we have tons of mentions in our songs, like from the first anti-heroes record. That's right. There's a line in it that was written in 1986 that says, another Nazi coming around. Let's run him out of town. Some fun. And, then there was on the second record, there was the record Gone with the Wind. It was making fun of all the Southern rednecks that we would rub shoulders with. There was the song All Hail Santa that was a satire of all the neo Nazis that were coming into the music scene at the time. And then on the Election Day 7-inch that we recorded in 1989, we wrote a song called You'll Never Put Us Down, which was a direct shot back at the Nazis that used to cause tons of trouble with us over that time. So, and then, like I mean, so basically, I'm saying that it's completely absurd to make that accusation. But, like on our second record, released in 1988, the song Don't Tread on Me, it says the last line is, I'm an American, proud and free. I'm an American, I believe in equality. Don't tell me what to do or what to be. I'm an American, don't tread on me. And, in the 90s, we released the American Pie record. The first song is a tradition, and it says, born and bred from immigrant blood, made a hardworking man out of me. So, you know, the the contention that has happened recently by people saying that making that slanderous attack on the anti-heroes is emblematic of the fact that the eras have changed. And specifically, here's what caused this big hoo-ha to happen. I grew up all over the world. My father worked for the CIA, and I lived in the Soviet Union in Moscow in the 1970s for 4 years. I lived in communist China in the 1980s. I had really good friends who were Chinese students who were part of the democracy movement. I lived there from 83 to 89, and the Chinese Communist Party killed them all, and they just disappeared forever. So I've never had, having had a personal experience of living in communist countries, I've never had a positive view of communism. Sorry, but lived there, done that. I studied it in college, and and I thought maybe I would follow my dad in his footsteps, and I'm glad that I did not. But I know a shitload about it, and I know the history. I know that there was an excellent article written by a Harvard student about her parents who had fled communist Romania during the Cold War, and were like in danger of being killed for leaving. They came to America. They became legal citizens and thrived like most good people do who come to America. And she couldn't believe that now she's going to Harvard, and Marxism is the most popular, subject on the college campus of one of the best universities in America. So she wrote an article called 100 Years, 100 Million Lives. And the simple historical reality is communism killed more than 100 million people in the 20th century. So I know a lot about it. I'm not a fan of it, and I'm an advocate that, communism and Nazism are essentially two sides of the same coin. And so in that context, I watched with disbelief in the last 5 years of the decline of Western civilization, the intentional demolition of the United States of America and the rights that we have all lived under and thrived under what is essentially a Maoist cultural revolution. So, at any rate, I'm very opposed to communism and to Nazism. It's well known, and as a person in a band, we write songs about what we think. And recently, on one of our social media pages, I posted that the riots in 2020 and the riots in 2025 were clearly an orchestrated, organized, paid for by USAID and NGO money attempt to have a color revolution in America. And a color revolution, for those that don't know what it is a term coined by the CIA for making a contrived and orchestrated rebellion in a country where you would have a core group of 2,000 or 3,000 agitators, and they would, foment other people to become agitated until you had a big crowd of like 10 or 20,000 people, and you could say, hey, we're having a revolution. And they've done that in more than 80 countries around the world. And it's apparent to me that they're doing that in America now. So I put on our social media page that these riots were orchestrated contrivances that were trying to undermine the future of the country. And there became an immediate reply to that from communist groups all throughout the music scene. You know, that meme that you're talking about came from some band that has two songs out on a 7-inch from Glasgow, Scotland. And they're clearly like beyond communists. They're like the anarcho communists and stuff like that. I mean, people who think that you shouldn't have roads anymore because you're killing the environment, stuff like that. Then we got messages and other internet attacks from clear communist groups all over Facebook, from Barcelona, from all over the place. And so it's obvious to me, we hit a nerve by pointing out the truth. And so they're all up in arms about it. And everybody who knows anything about the anti-heroes knows that their allegations are nonsense. But in the world of today's modern extremist politics, the super left want to say that anybody who's not super left like them is a Nazi. And the rest of us who used to vote Democrat and, that are centrists, people in the center of the political spectrum, are left out in the cold. They want to label anyone who's not in favor of a knee-jerk reaction attack on America and all the other countries that have free rights. They want to label everyone who isn't a Nazi. For example, there's another very contrived attack on Elon Musk. Elon Musk went to try to save America from going bankrupt because it's clear to any competent business person that America is teetering like down a hill on a collision course with bankruptcy. And if that did happen in this country, it would have extremely deleterious effects to the quality of life in America. I mean, it would be like America went bankrupt and you would wake up in the morning and there'd be no electricity. And if there was no electricity, there'd be no running water, stuff like that. And and Elon was accurately describing this financial situation in America, and given an opportunity to volunteer to use his substantial IQ to find places to cut money out of the federal budget that could help save the economy. And their reaction to that is Elon is a legal immigrant to America, super genius, very productive, a highly, successful business person. Their reaction is, well, if he doesn't like what we're doing trying to run America into bankruptcy, then Elon's a Nazi. And there was one of these contrived series of attacks on the Tesla dealerships and all of these silly, like they call them crisis actors. You can actually see advertisements for them on public media where they say, like $25 an hour to go hold a sign in front of a Tesla dealership. I mean, it's absurd. So that's what I said. I said that the communists are having a contrived attempt at a revolution, and they turned around and said, "You guys are Nazis."
Mhm. You've given me a lot to unpack in that answer. So let me circle back to a couple of points. Number
Sure.
one, you mentioned about the protests being orchestrated. Um, I know a little bit about protests, having been a working journalist for a quarter century. I've covered them. I've been very intimate with some of them. I don't disagree with your position on that because let's look at it in terms of common sense. If you and I decided today that we were going to do a protest against something, what would we do? We would maybe post an event page on Facebook. We'd call up our friends. We'd meet up in a kitchen somewhere with magic markers and poster boards and make signs, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Well, take one of the more recent protests that we saw, the big one in California, okay, which was before it even began, you saw the major news networks covering it.
Correct.
Do, do you,
Long.
do you and I have a contact for NBC News that we can call up NBC News and
Right.
we're going to have a protest? So just the
Or
very
every
nature.
single news outlet that had the same messaging just like when they had the same messaging for the coronavirus and for everyone to get in a panic over that. This is an orchestrated attempt to undermine the foundations of this country.
I will agree with you in that mass protests of the nature we've seen recently.
Yeah.
Um, Based on my professional experience and expertise, I feel very comfortable agreeing with that point of view, that these events were very heavily orchestrated and funded and organized by
Yeah. I
great
mean, everyone has the
powers.
same signs. They have the pallets of bricks that arrive on the location the day before and stuff like that. I mean, it is, it's bizarre. But to say what you observe is the truth and then to be called a Nazi because of it is just, it's just not true. It's like calling the Pope a Muslim. There's no fact in it.
Right, right. And let me say as well, the individuals you've noted in your response who have made the accusations against your band, if anyone from that camp wants to come on this channel and present their point of view, you're certainly welcome to do so. I do want to extend that offer.
Yeah.
Uh, but having said that, and that's a legitimate offer. So if anyone's watching this gritting their teeth over anything Mark is saying, you can come on. Let me know.
You should have them on. I'm in favor of the First Amendment to freedom of speech. You know, I think that people should not be able to be in a position where they can say you can't say that.
Absolutely.
And but you know, I'm 100% in favor of that. But the simple fact is that if I said something about these protests that the communists are organizing, and the communists say that I'm a Nazi because of it, there's no truth in that, and that's what they're saying.
Well, based on what has been going around social media with respect to the anti-heroes in the last week or so that I've seen, has that had much of an immediate impact on the band? Because obviously you're still out, you're performing, you've got a record that came out last year, you've
Yeah,
got
it has had no real impact on us at all. I mean, you know, we see it as it is. You know, these same people, they they called all the venues that we had scheduled to play at in August and got our shows canceled as well. So there's a bunch of people that were going to go to those shows that are disappointed, but it hasn't changed anything for the anti-heroes.
mm,
But let me tell you this: this whole thing with communism started when we played a series of sold out shows in Europe in 2023, and we played a show in Hamburg, which has a big communist scene, which I did not know. And I wore, you know, when you're on tour, you have a small bag, and you might have like 5 shirts in it or something. So you line them up, and I just grab one, two, three, and then when they're done, then go to the laundromat and wash them. So I grabbed a shirt and put it on, and it said "Let's Go Brandon" on it. And you know, when we just did this new Anti-Heroes record called "Devil at My Heels," John Blackwell, who had produced the first two Anti-Heroes records back in the '80s, he came in and did some of the production work with us, which was awesome. It was great to be able to work with him again. And he's like 82 years old, and he's really, really smart and really a nice guy. And we've always gotten along really great. And so he came in to do the production work. And on the back of his car, there's a Bernie sticker. And on the back of my car, there's a "Let's Go Brandon" sticker. I mean, so what?
mm.
And we got along great, and he really enjoyed working on the record and all this stuff. But at any rate, back to Hamburg, I go into the venue wearing this shirt, "Let's Go Brandon." I didn't even think anyone in Germany would know what that meant, but I was wrong. And so we played a show. The show went great, and you know, they paid us, they fed us, they gave us an apartment to stay in, and then we drove to Berlin to play a sold out show in Berlin that night, the next night. And while we're driving, this like tempest in a tea kettle blows up on the internet where everyone's saying they have a picture of me with my "Let's Go Brandon" shirt on, and it says "Nazi punks fuck off." And these guys are so into internet stuff that they've actually taken the font of the shirt and found out where it was printed. And, you know, I don't know if you ever heard of this comedian named JP Sears. JP Sears, I believe his name is. Just a funny guy who does a bunch of videos and stuff like that. And that's where my mother-in-law bought the shirt and sent it to me. And so they put on the internet, well, if he has that shirt, that means he listens to JP Sears. That means he's a Nazi. And they all went off on it. They called all the places we were playing and tried to get us canceled unsuccessfully, and and all that. So then we went back to the States, and the same band called the Red Pricks. They called all the shows that we had scheduled in 2023 in the States and tried to get them canceled. So that was 2023. Then in 2024, we went to Spain to record this new Anti-Heroes record because we really like the production style that a lot of the Spanish oi bands are getting. It sounds really great and really really high quality. So we went to the studio, and this guy goes, "Oh yeah, I'd love to do this record with you." And we were in the studio for like 5 days, having a great time. And it was an excellent studio, very nice guy running it. And then on the fifth day in the morning, I get a message in my email saying, if you guys record this new song called Make the World Great Again, then you're finished in punk. And so we just went, whatever. This is not about money for us. So we went and recorded the song. And that night, the studio owner got threatened similarly. Like, if you continue to record this band, you're finished. And he called me and apologized and said, I can't work on the record with you guys anymore. And he looked really scared. And at any rate, he's a very nice guy. And so we took the tapes of what we had recorded so far, took it back to the States, and we had another studio lined up in Asheville, North Carolina. And a day before we were scheduled to go in there, they called me and said, "Here's your money back. You're canceled. We've been informed that you're canceled. We're not allowed to record you guys." So we went to another studio that's owned by a friend of ours, and he was like, "Hell yeah, I'd love to do that." And so we finished the record, and it came out in September of 2024. But that's where this whole kind of slippery slope with the communists going after us started. And so they're like ghosting our social media pages, looking for something that they can say is objectionable. And so they saw the kind of accurate post that we made about these contrived riots, and they were like, okay, that's a clear white supremacist post, which it's not. And that's the whole long and short of it. So them canceling our shows or getting us thrown out of studios is really kind of high school bullshit. That doesn't affect us at all.
And I think in this world, people are forgetting that multiple truths can exist simultaneously. You know,
Correct.
you
and
can,
and you don't have to be a communist in order to have a decent life.
right, and secondarily, you can support, if you choose to, the philosophy behind the recent protests we've seen, and also acknowledge that it's orchestrated. I think that's
Yeah,
possible.
and I don't have a problem with that. But the this issue is very clear to me that it started when I had a "Let's Go Brandon" shirt on. I mean, it's amazing, and you said it in the early part of getting ready for this interview. The kind of establishment viewpoint has become very, very prevalent in punk today, which is very unusual. In the 80s and the 70s and in the 90s, the irredentist freedom point of view was pretty much what punk was. People would say whatever you want, and nobody cared. For example, there was a hilarious punk band, a lot like the Blank 77, from Atlanta, called Freddie Vomit and Teens in Heat. And when I was a teenager, I saw them and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And they were all over the place, but whatever. We were at a party one time, and Freddie from Freddie Vomit, or Freddie Vomit himself, walks over to a friend of mine, and he's all wasted, and he goes, "So what if I butt fucked Luigi?" He goes, "So what?" And everyone was just like, "Yeah, who cares? I don't care about your sex life. Whatever." And and that's the difference between 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s punk to today. Today, it's like, well, gee, you're not wearing a mask. You must be a racist, communist, Nazi. I mean, it's absurd, and none of it stands up to any kind of logic. It's all this kind of rote and emotional appreciation of this kind of extremist politic.
Yeah, yeah. The nuances are being overlooked and disregarded. And I've
Yeah,
always found that the nuances are what make the situations interesting. It's like,
correct.
we were talking as well about, how we kind of ended up crossing paths in the same clubs back in the 90s when I was really hitting the ground hard, playing in bands, whether it be Broken Heroes or I was on another band on Headache Records as well. So I was kind of in
Oh,
that scene. What's that?
really? Which one was that?
I was in a band called Squiggy for a few
What,
years.
what was the other band?
A band called Squiggy.
Okay, cool, nice.
Yeah, I mean, I was
Yeah,
very,
I remember that.
I was aware of some of that stuff going on, and there were a lot of great bands, and there were a lot of absolute garbage bands back then, and there were bands who had songs I agreed with, and bands who had songs I didn't agree with. But you know what I did? I didn't buy the records. I didn't go to the shows if I didn't care for the band or the message
Well,
they were.
that's right. That's the Yeah, that's what America is always supposed to have been, a marketplace of ideas.
Yeah.
And, everyone can have their own ideas and do whatever they want. And that's what it's supposed to be. And, you know, like you said, is this affecting you? The answer is no. But what it is doing is it's making us, you know, respond because it's such bullshit. I'm not going to stand around and allow a bunch of people that don't know us to make false accusations because the pretense that they're working under is Joseph Goebbels' idea that if you repeat a lie enough times, it becomes the truth.
Mhm.
And that doesn't work for us. We're not going to accept that. And, especially considering the fact, like I had said earlier, we threw down against the bad guys back in the day and have got the scars, and we're not going to take any shit over this issue.
Mhm. Well, as I said before we started recording, I said expect a little bit of pushback in some cases. So
And
here,
that's fine.
let me push back on something. Bouncing off
Okay.
the previous point I just made about choosing not to support a band or buy a record. There was a time I kept my distance from anti-heroes, and I'll tell you why. Um, I started going
Okay.
like playing regularly in like the pipeline and all that. 96, 95. And that was around the time the American Pie record came out. And
Right.
I remember looking at the cover thinking, oh, well, that's a bit of a cheap shot. It's a mentally challenged young man, we'll say on the cover. And I'm
Right.
I'm like, okay, I get it. Yeah, I know it's punk rock, whatever. But you also do a cover of the Patti Smith song Rock and Roll N-Word, okay?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I had no beef with your rendition of the song because I think that record is actually one of your better ones in retrospect. But I do remember thinking back in the day, because I was playing in bands that were similar aesthetically and musically to Anti-Heroes, thinking, is it really going to do us any fucking good if there's a skinhead band from Georgia chanting the N-word on an album? Like,
That's a valid point.
can you guys not do that? Maybe it would be smarter not to go in that direction. So let me push that ball in your court and say,
Sure.
um, surely you guys had to know you were going to get pushback by doing that.
Are you ready for me to respond?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. So the bottom line is as you pointed out, Patti Smith is kind of like the queen of New York punk rock and was an extremely talented artist. More than just a person belting out punk songs. She was really a talented and highly intelligent person. So there's a great now censored live version of the song Rock and Roll N-Word where she does what she called a babalogue. And it's like a 3-minute intro to the song. It's incredibly awesome. And then the song goes on. But the bottom line is you're right. I mean, it could be considered very offensive, no doubt about it. But we changed the words to meet our life at the time. And the song is called I Am a Rock and Roll N Word. It's talking about us. And the meaning of that to us was, you know, we did really well with the songs that we wrote. You know, we were the only boy band that ever got played on MTV or on satellite radio, or, you know, American Pie and Underneath the Underground both charted on college radio during the 90s and stuff like that. And yet there was always this kind of, you guys are from Georgia, you know, you guys are idiots, you know, you're morons. Or they would make, you know, this kind of obtuse way of basically denigrating the band for being basically like a working class band. And that's what we were. So we said, that's on us. I am a rock and roll N-word. So yeah, I mean, you could say, is it that productive to play that? And that's a valid point, you know, because a lot of people would say, God, I can't believe you said that, or I can't believe you played that. But Patti Smith played it and did great with it. You know, we played a show in Chicago about a year ago and some change, and an African American skinhead girl came up to us and said, I want to play that song with you guys on stage. And I said, you know, we'd love to do it, but we're not going to play it because people just don't get it anymore, because the era has changed. And that's us censoring ourselves. And but you know, it's a great song. Musically, it's a great song. You know, impact wise, in terms of what it's saying, is a great song, because she's talking about herself. And
Right.
she was kind of a bastard stepchild of the New York punk scene, just like the Anti-Heroes were a bastard stepchild of the American punk scene. So, in a nutshell, that's a description of why we played the song, why, you know, why we recorded it on our record. You know, it's and here's a funny, you know, historical piece. When we recorded it, we were recording in a studio owned by a friend of ours who had worked on the first two records in the 80s. And he had a huge studio in Atlanta. He had like 6 different studios in one big building. And he did tons and tons of editing work for the Turner Network and for CNN and stuff like that. And he did tons and tons of rap songs. He
Mhm.
did like all of the rap from the Southeast and Atlanta and stuff like that. And a bunch of those guys were in the studio in the break room with us, and we were hanging out chatting. And a bunch of rap dudes came and sang backups on that song when we recorded it, and they loved it. So people can say the connotation of the word, you know, you can't say that, or you shouldn't have said that. And I don't, you know, I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, it's a great song, and we recorded it, and people loved it. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, when we played it live at the Beer Olympics, you know, like the Templars came up and sang it with us and stuff like that. I mean, to say that the song has anything to do with race is just a total joke. The song has got everything to do with rebellion, and you're basically giving the middle finger to the establishment, because that's, I mean, the Anti-Heroes have always been like that, and that's the outro line of the song. You know, outside of society, that's where I'm going to be. So yeah, in today's era where you're not allowed to say things because we're lurching somnambulistically into George Orwell's doublespeak, I can totally get it that people will be offended by it. But at the same time, it's a great song. It's a punk classic, and it epitomized the way we interacted with the so-called, I call it the punk royalty. You know, like you could approach the punk royalty, hey, can you guys help us distribute this record? And it was kind of like, no. So we did it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate you taking that on. I appreciate you answering that question. You know,
Oh, it's a good question. I like it. Thanks for asking it.
yeah, and you know, continuing on with saying, you know, multiple things are true at the same time. You know, you have a label called GMM, uh,
Yep.
and you've put out a lot of records by a variety of bands, including the Templars. Um,
Yeah, we produced over 100 records,
yeah,
and I personally did a lot of the production work, and I really enjoyed it. But I often tell people it was the most expensive party I've ever been to, because I worked my ass off on it, and we didn't really make any money. But I don't think making money was the point. You know, promoting that type of music subculture was the point, and we did that very well.
And you put out great stuff, including the Templars, who last time I checked would not be white power. You also put out a
Correct, but they've been accused of that. That's the most absurd thing, is that this same group of far left people that are after us now have accused the Templars of being white supremacist, which is just, you know, it's just absurd. It's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But at any rate, there you go.
yeah. You also put out
But
Gnostic Front. You spend 5 minutes with
yep,
Benny Stigma. That guy's not racist. So your
no,
history
and
does speak
and
for itself.
I'm sorry.
I was saying your history does speak for itself in terms of the output you've released. You're not working with
That's
these goose stepping bands that all look the same and have the same skin tone. So,
That's correct. I mean, we put out records by the Casualties, by Oxymoron, One Way System. We did the Ducky Boys. We did the Trouble. We did Patriot, the Templars, Main Street Saints. I mean, we did an absolute ton of records. And looking back on it, like I said, it was the most expensive party I've ever been to, but it was an honor to be able to do that. It was very enjoyable. Like I spent a week in the studio with producing the record Omnidatum Optimum by the Templars, which is one of the best Oi records that's ever been made. So, I didn't make any money, but it was an honor to be part of that. It was an honor to be part of the Anti-Heroes records that we did, the Patriot records that we did, all those different records. There's bands on GMM that no one's ever heard of that were amazing, like the Murder City Rex. They didn't get really well known, but they were amazing. So, yeah, I mean, we did, like you said, our ethos speaks for itself. And everybody knew that the reason that there weren't any Nazis rolling down to the shows in Atlanta in the 90s is because of the conflict that we led against them in the 80s. That's specifically the reason.
well, you have a history of pushing back against the Nazi philosophy. Um, that said, why do you think it is that that tag keeps following you decade after decade when you have such a documented history going in the other direction?
I think it's because, I mean, the Anti-Heroes are an honest to goodness working class band, and all of us, like, you know, I was a union member for 38 years. One of the guys in the band is a Army veteran and also a union member in his profession. One of the guys in the band is a carpenter. One of the guys is an auto mechanic. We're not a bunch of suburban kind of chicken shit dudes from Southern California. And so, having a working class outlook is not what the punk rock royalty really likes. They like the kind of nasally, Warped Tour music, which we could not be bothered with. And so, but at the same time, I don't really think that there's been some moniker that has followed us around. I mean, every time you occasionally will run into someone, who has an opposing viewpoint, you can get that from them, but whatever. I think that kind of moniker has followed Oi music around since its inception. Really, I mean, that's been something that has dogged everybody, and whatever. Like I said, we came to sing about what we wanted to sing about. We didn't come for anything else. And so, a lot of people liked what we had to say, and a lot of people didn't. And like you said earlier, if you didn't like something, don't go to the show. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. For any viewers out there who are watching this, who may not know the backstory, I wanted to bring up the American History X situation, because I'm sure to this day there are
sure.
people who watch that film, and inevitably they're going to see things in the film, specifically your logo, perhaps, where
Well, actually, no. Can I interject something?
absolutely, please.
Yeah. So when they made that movie, the Anti-Heroes were a very popular American Oi band. And so they were looking for background music and T-shirts and logos and stuff like that. And they approached the label that we were on with, about buying the rights to use that stuff of ours in their movie. And we said no. And they did it anyway.
Mm.
And so we sued them, and it took like it was a long time. It took like a year for that case to come to fruition, and they settled out of court. They lost. And the last day that our lawyer was running up against them in a courtroom, they had 17 lawyers at their little island desk in there. So those guys are making like $500 an hour. The movie company, which was the largest movie company in America, I'm sure they're used to just elbowing someone in the face and taking their intellectual property. And we told them absolutely no, fuck no and fuck you. And they lost. And then we wrote a song about it. I mean, pure and simple. I mean, from our experience of fighting the boneheads in the 80s, why would we want to have anything to do with that? I mean, and they literally approached us and said, "Can we do it?" And we're like, "Oh, blow it out your ass."
Fantastic. And absolutely right that you did that, you know.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of band. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made with whoring yourself out in Hollywood, but that's not the kind of money that we wanted to make.
Yeah, yeah. Not worth it. Not worth it if you're attached to something like that.
Oh, it's absurd. It's like allowing them to just throw a bucket of dirt in your face,
Mhm.
or to throw a bucket of paint in your face and make you look like something that you're not. So yeah, we sued them, and it was really nasty. They called my house at like 2 in the morning and threatened me, and then the next day someone would call and try and be really nice, like good cop bad cop kind of stuff. I mean, it was really absurd, but it was enough. The more that they fucked with us, the more determined we were to fight them and to make them lose. And they did. I think there's a great line in that song we wrote about them. It's called NLC, which stands for New Line Cinema, and it says something like, "Oh gosh," it calls them the Marie Antoinette of the film industry. That's what it said. The line goes, "Snide merchants of fantasy, Marie Antoinette of the film industry." I mean, fuck those guys. What a bunch of a-holes. And they literally, but like I said, they would call the house at like 2 in the morning and go like, we're gonna destroy you in court. You're gonna lose everything and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, guys, man, what do you think you are? But yeah, when they lost, not only did they have to settle out of court, but they had to remove the logo from their movie. They had to re-edit their whole movie and take it out of the theaters and then put the new edited version back in. So, like an old World War II veteran friend of mine said, "Hooray for me and fuck you."
Yeah, yeah. Right on. Right on for doing it. That was the right thing to do.
Yeah, it was comical.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just so absurd. I mean, it's and on that record that came out at the same time was that song "Fuck Hollywood." I mean, it's like it came out at the same time. And I mean, "Fuck Hollywood" is still played on XM radio now, 30 years after the fact, which I think is very amusing as well. And on our new record, there's a "Fuck Hollywood" part 2. So check that out sometime. If you send me your street address, I'll send you a vinyl copy of the new record. It's pretty funny.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. Um, I do want to mention the other band making some news the last few days from our world, from this thing of ours. And that's the Dropkick Murphys, who I know you did a split with back in the day. Um,
Sure.
they're making the rounds because they're refusing to play Punk in the Park
Right.
because
I read that. I read about that.
the organizers, from my understanding, had made a contribution to the Trump campaign. The fellows in the Dropkicks were made aware of that and made the decision as a band not to participate in that event. Since we're kind of on the topic of bands' reactions to the political world, I want to toss that one at you because obviously you know those guys. I knew those guys when they were first starting out. It's fantastic to see where they've gone in their careers. Um, and not to prompt any kind of uh, bickering, perhaps, but I think it's a fair question to ask because they put themselves out there as making their position known, and they've walked away from a prominent live music event as a band, and people are talking about it. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up to you for all the reasons just stated. So, what are your thoughts on, A, specifically the Dropkicks walking away from that festival, and two, bands doing similar things where they're not working with particular record companies because that label may have put out a record they don't like from the past or what have you.
I'm not the kind of person that lords over other people's opinions,
Hmm.
and I don't go out of my way to intercede in other people's conversations or their decisions that they make as a band and stuff like that. I mean, that's just not my thing. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think that someone's right to say, I don't want to play a show with this promoter. It's fine. And the promoter's right to donate money to somebody that this band doesn't like. That's fine too. I think, it is a birthright of Americans to be able to make their own decisions in the ballot box and where they want to donate money to. And so, yeah, I mean, they can say whatever they want, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that guy donating money to the Trump campaign. I mean, for somebody to say that the last 4 years that we just experienced as a country under the Biden administration should continue is just absurd. And to see the blatant out in the open communism that they were pushing during their campaign is also absurd. So to say, oh yeah, let's have 4 more years of that, that's just fucking ridiculous. So I think that if that promoter wanted to donate to something that was different, that's his right. Just like it's their right to say no, we don't want to do it. I mean, we've got a great song on our new record called Ice Cream Hitler. And there's a video of it that's been heavily censored, but it's all about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Mhm.
And it's not exactly the most glowing review.
I always believed, when I got into punk rock, one of the reasons I did as a young kid was because you were able to attack sacred cows and you were able to question
100%.
everything. There's nothing wrong with parodying elected leaders. And
No. In fact, that was one of the most common things that you heard in the punk rock of our era was, like Rock Against Reagan. I went to that when I was in high school in 1983. And, our old guitar player and I, who wrote the first two Anti-Heroes records together, we used to joke about how when Reagan gets out of office, the punk rock world is going to disintegrate because they won't have anything to complain about. But the essence of the matter is you're absolutely correct. You should be able to say anything, and the marketplace of ideas should be able to say yay or nay. We don't like that or support it or whatever. People should be able to say anything they want, and that's what we've gone away from. We've gotten away from that into this kind of new communazi tyranny. But clearly, coming from a family of old school Democrats, like my family was all union members, and my dad was the first person to go to college, and they were all from Pittsburgh. And it's pretty neat. I went back to the neighborhoods that my parents grew up in, and I saw, like the church where my mom was baptized in and stuff like that. It was really pretty cool. I saw the old library where my mom used to go and get books because their family was so broke that they couldn't buy any. And so I really like the history of America, and I like the, and being part of the American working class. I've always been a proud proponent of the people that work in this country, and also the ability for people to work hard and be industrious and reinvest money in themselves and be very successful.
Mhm.
And that has been something that the corruption that has afflicted America for the last 60 years from both parties has willowed away the ability for young people to be able to be successful in America anymore. And that's globalism. And that is something that has afflicted all of Europe. And it's not like some sort of accident that happened. It was a controlled policy, like the deindustrialization of the West and the shifting of all that massive amount of industrial and economic capacity from the West to communist China. And that's happened in the last 40 years. So I would say that anyone who doesn't support the working class of America, anyone who thinks that globalism is great and screw all the Americans and stuff like that, or all the people in Europe, they don't really have those people's best interest at heart. And clearly, the last 5 years have been the most outrageous assault on the average person's ability to make a living. I mean, more than 1 million businesses were extinguished during the coronavirus clampdowns and stuff like that. But they never closed Walmart or big box stores. And that's not a mistake. That was a policy. And then it so in a roundabout way, as someone who purportedly, is in favor of the average Joe in America, who is supporting the average Joe in America now? That's my question. And the answer to that question is the guy who's putting on that punk in the park thing. He was donating to support the average Joe.
Well, all I can tell you is from my personal perspective, I look back at my not not to open up my bank account on the show, but I look back almost 20 years ago where my salary at that time was less than half of what I make now. And in those days, I was able to support a wife and a stepchild in an apartment that was fully heated, fully cooled in the summer, fridge full of food every day because we had a kid, we had to provide. Fast forward, my stepson's now an adult doing his own thing. I live alone currently. I have a single income and I'm barely making it. And I was making less than half of what I'm making now back then. So,
Right.
I mean, that's not a political statement. That's just what I'm seeing in life. So,
That's and that's the reality of globalism sucking the financial capability out of the West in order to intentionally destabilize and destroy it. I mean, I 100% agree with the picture that you just portrayed. The same thing with the purchasing power of the dollar that you make. It's been cut in half.
mhm.
I mean, a gallon of milk. We have two teenagers who drink a lot of milk, and a gallon of milk, of organic milk, if you don't want all the crap in there for them to get sick on, is $10.
Yeah,
20 years ago, it was like $1.50.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that's not a mistake. That is the controlled demolition of the middle class of the West, because those were the people that grew up out of poverty into being successful. And the intention of this whole kind of pain in the, well, I don't know what the best word to describe it is, but we have a song on our new record called Globalist Shithead. But the intention of globalism is to bring everybody from the level of success that they might have been industrious enough and to get up to down to the same level of misery,
Mhm.
and to replace the sovereignty of nations with a one world tyrannical government with the CC as the model. And, they've been very successful doing that. They're sucking the air out of the room, the financial air out of the room. And it's disgraceful. And both parties in America have been pumping that up. I mean, on the first record, American Pie, that you're talking about, we wrote this song called Heroes and Zeros about this exact situation. And in the 90s, the economic power of the average person was dramatically better than it is now. Just like in the 50s, the economic power of the average person was like unfathomably better than it is now. I mean, I see where things have been going, and I'm worried about the financial future of our children when they get older. I mean, they'll be in a position where if they're not skilled with really good skills that we're going to try to develop in them, they won't be able to make enough money to buy a house. That's what the normal thing that the working class could do in the past. So yeah, to support globalism in a long, you know, circuitous route, to answer your question, is like supporting killing yourself. It's just ridiculous.
I think any American, particularly any punk rocker in America, should seriously ask themselves, are we better off than our previous generation?
Correct. Compare yourself. How are you better off than your parents were?
Yeah. And the answer, frankly, is no. And I have
Is that absolutely no?
and I have more education than my parents. I have degrees, they don't. On paper, I should be moving up, right? My parents, who were predominantly laborers in their careers, made less than I do, and they supported, my brother and I. We had a big house, cars, and it really makes you wonder, like, the houses,
Right.
you know, you can buy a house for, $50 and a stick of bubble gum back then, right? I mean, that's the joke. But now I look at home prices, I'm like, I'm going to rent until I die because there's no way in hell, even if I make an extra 20, 30 grand a year, I'm still not going to be able to invest in that home and make a secure living. And that's fucked up. And why?
And you're correct. It is 100% fucked up.
And the question is, how come you and I are having that conversation, but 90% of our punk rock scene and community is not there yet having this conversation? Why is that? That's what concerns me.
It's a good question. I don't know the complete answer to that, but partially the answer to that is the fact that the people that are responsible for sucking the financial air out of the room are also responsible for creating the propagandized stream of bullshit in the American media that everyone seems to believe. A lot of people just believe it. I remember I took 4 years of Arabic when I went to college,
Hmm.
and that's an interesting language and interesting cultures. And I watched the invasion of Iraq just jaw dropped because for several reasons. First and foremost, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with terrorism. He was a secular dictator who was afraid of the terrorists because they could destabilize his country.
Mhm.
Second off, when they did the invasion, they had this Hollywood style film crew embedded with every different unit and all this kind of stuff. And then they edited everything out where things would often not be true. And one of the things that I saw that made me stop watching any news at all. Like I turned off cable TV in our house. We don't have anything like that. I don't watch any regular mainstream news because it's bullshit. But they had a clip where this minivan's driving toward a checkpoint, and the bunch of young guys are manning the checkpoint, and it doesn't stop when it gets up to the checkpoint, so they hose it down. They shoot it with like 400 bullets. They run over to it, open the door, and it's a family of, a mother and a father, a couple of children, and a grandmother, and they're all in pieces. And the grandmother is still alive, and she's yelling in Arabic, "Oh God, how could this happen?" And this kid with wraparound shades on puts his hand up in front of the camera, and he goes, "She says it's okay because we're fighting the terrorists." And then they clip cuts,
Mm.
and it was just a lie. Similarly, I was watching like four different channels at the same time, skipping back and forth. And Wolf Blitzer gets on CNN, and he goes, New York National Guard unit has gone through a checkpoint and were ambushed, and they took a bunch of prisoners and they killed all the men, and they kept two female prisoners and didn't kill them. And then he comes back on like 10 minutes later and said, that didn't happen. That was a mistake. I didn't mean to say that. So I tuned in Al Jazeera, and I saw these 8 National Guard guys getting shot in the parking deck of this hospital. So, that's one of the reasons why a lot of people aren't talking about what's going on, because they've been led to believe that it's not going on.
Right. Right. I
Yeah. I
I
mean, we're at like a Brave New World. I don't know if you read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, but it's likely that you did. And we're at that level. And in my opinion, is that Aldous Huxley and his brother Julian, who is one of the instrument people starting the United Nations, I think Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World not as like a warning to the future, but as like a blueprint for the future.
mm, mm. Well, I as a professional journalist, I fear for my profession
Yeah.
forward. I have a lot of trepidation when it comes to what I'm seeing. I see a lot of very disgraceful acts being committed in the name of my profession.
Yep.
And it's of grave concern for me. What I will tell people watching this video, just as a little PSA from Uncle Joel, if you get your news off your Facebook feed, you are being manipulated.
Right.
100%. It doesn't
A
matter if you're
1,000%.
right wing or left wing. If that's what you're getting your information from, you are being manipulated. 100%. Do not believe what you're seeing.
No, it's unbelievably disgraceful, and it's the kind of thing that if my parents were alive today, they would just be like jaw struck by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I think is important, and the question becomes, yes, everything is really fucked up with all these things that you've mentioned and what we've been discussing. What's the solution? I don't know. But at least the first step can be let's have conversations like this where
Right?
different perspectives are being shared. I can't say I've agreed with everything you shared in this conversation, but I appreciate the fact that you've come on and shared them.
Yeah,
And what's important, because at least now my hope is that people watch this video, having seen that meme that was going around, they can at least listen to what you have to say. They don't have to agree with it. They can still have the same opinion of you they had last week. But
that's fine.
yeah, but at least now they've had your words. They can consider the source as opposed to some guy on some social media page saying something, which is useful.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like that song "Heroes and Zeros" that I was mentioning. There's a line in there that says, "Heroes and zeros, which one are you going to be? America is sinking, and you're asleep in front of your TV." And then another line saying, "No one's got a plan. No one gives a damn for the working man." And it's 100% true. The intention is to turn everyone into a serf.
Yeah, I look at my social media feed, and every day I think more and more, this is a fucking psyop, you know?
It is.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, it started out in the 1950s. It was called Operation Mockingbird, and the modern um, uh, psyop has become so sophisticated and so high tech no one even knows what the name is now, but it's like a grandson of Operation Mockingbird, which was the CIA illegally manipulating the American media
Mm,
and the world media. That's where they started it. That's what their congressional mandate is to be. But then they started doing it to America.
mm.
I mean, you know, and I 100% agree with you when you said, I don't agree with everything you said, but, or if someone else wants to watch something or watch this and say, hey, I don't agree with that guy, or I still think he's full of shit, that's totally cool. I don't mind. But the bottom line is what you just said is 1,000% correct. What you're seeing in modern media and modern social media is a psyop. I mean, look no farther than the psyop that was the coronavirus and the shots. It was a two-prong attack, and the psyop was so huge it had everybody running for the doors. Everyone has to get a mask, gloves, all this kind of stuff. You know, I grew up, like I said earlier, my dad worked for the CIA. I grew up in China. The first thing I thought of when the coronavirus happened was this sounds like biological warfare, because the Chinese Communist Party have a book called Unrestricted Warfare. And it's like a playbook on how to take down America with an asymmetric assault. They knew that they couldn't fight America toe to toe. So they have a multifaceted envelopment of the country, like take the assault on America through the southern border with drugs. Drugs kill millions of people and ruin millions more people's lives. That's one element. The assault on everybody's mind through the social media. That's another, like a psychological warfare. And that is huge. It's all around us.
Mm.
And and it's just very, very distressing to see so many people not able to wrap their mind around it. And a lot of really good people.
Yeah, I think in some degree it's reasonable. If you have people who lost a loved one to COVID or lost their jobs to COVID, they may not be apt to listen to what you've just said, because they believe that this was, not a conspiracy theory, not a psyop, a kill
Yeah,
all job, and and you can, I think it's fair enough that we can both empathize with that point of view.
100% empathize with that point of view.
What I would add to that and what I would caution people watching this conversation is, regardless of where you stand on the COVID issue, pay close attention to how quickly and how quickly our culture changed and we followed the government's direction. Be very
Right?
mindful.
People followed like lemmings.
Yeah, just and how easy that happened.
Yep.
I'm not, that's not a position I'm taking, whether good or bad. I'm just saying that happened. Pay attention to that.
Yeah. And to add on to that, like you said, it's easy to see the logic and empathizing with someone who wouldn't agree with that point of view. I agree with that. And here's something else. Like I lost my mother to the coronavirus shot and my oldest friend. And both of them knew that the disaster that happened in their health was directly related to the shot. For example, after, there is a litany. There's like a mile long paper trail of patents at the US Patent Office where Dr. Ralph Barrick and Dr. Shijing Li of the Wuhan Institute of Virology patented the coronavirus in 2015. And they wrote an article about it in Science magazine that you can Google search, called SARS-CoV-2 Emergence in Human Beings. And that was in 2015, 4 years before the pandemic. And the similar thing with the shots. The psyop was to terrorize people into this virus boogeyman into getting the shots.
Mhm.
And there is a litany of scientific data that showed that the shots were not going to be safe or effective. And that was suppressed along with the psyop. But here's the thing. My mother said to me after she got the shot, she said, and she was a very smart, very Katharine Hepburn-esque type of iconic American. And she said, something is really wrong with this thing that I just got. tomorrow I want you to take me to the doctor and have them take it out. And like 3 days later, she had a massive stroke and she was feeling like she was falling off of a cliff 24 hours a day for a year and a half until she was dead.
Hmm.
It's very clear to anyone who could see what happened. And she knew what happened. My oldest friend also died an agonizing death, knowing that it came from those shots. So, there's a website that you can actually go to called howbadismybatch.com. And you can see it lists the data for all the different batches of those shots. And some of them were 100% fine. Some of them had like 20% mortality for people who took that certain batch. And that's a fact. There's a mountain of scientific data that shows that millions of people have died from it. It's an incredible tragedy. So I can totally empathize with somebody who has been victimized by the situation, as well as someone who's been victimized by the other part of the situation. It's a tragic disaster.
Well, there's a lot to think about with what you just said.
Yeah,
And,
there is. You could talk about it for like a month.
and I appreciate you saying it. And my thought always is, I can tell in this conversation you're presenting your arguments and your perspectives from a very learned position. You're not a dummy. That's obvious,
Thank
and yeah, and you've clearly looked into things and you have a perspective. And I value that and I appreciate that. And anyone who's watching this video who's gotten to this point, who may go, oh man, this guy Mark is a bit too
you.
much.
Oh, it's so comical that they basically say like, "Oh, gee, that's crazy. How could you think that?" But there's a mountain of evidence that backs it up. On the inside of our new records record jacket, which I'll send you if you give me your street address, there is a series of footnotes, like in a history book, that back up everything I just said. And you can check it out. Let the free marketplace of ideas say yay or nay on what I just said.
Yeah, and certainly if anybody does that or follows up on anything you've said in this video, and if their research, if it's legitimate research, if their conclusions are different than yours, more power to them.
That's fine.
I
Yeah,
mean,
go get another series of shots. Pile them on.
that's what's missing here is, okay, why don't we look into this a bit further than just accepting the black and white, what I call the thumbnail mentality, where it's
Correct.
the image, here's the headline. Don't read the article, just look at the
Right.
thumbnail and the headline.
What believe what they tell you.
Yeah, believe what they tell you, which is killing my profession because my profession was the opposite of that. And I'm looking at
Right.
coming and it's like, I got to worry about the next 20 years. Do I have to paint houses and drive school buses in 10 years? Is this even going to survive?
Right. Is media going to be replaced by AI, which is just a continuation of the establishment?
Right.
And that's it goes back to what you said earlier in this conversation, which I think is so well said. I mean, you said that it was amazing to see the so-called rebellious punk world just take what the establishment told them about the coronavirus and the shots and follow it like lemmings instead of being, like the Clash about it. I mean, but at the same time, you could look at the later years of the Clash, and they joined the establishment also. They started pushing, I mean, I love the Clash when I was a kid, but by the time they came out with the Sandinista record, which was openly supporting communism, I was like, guys, I don't think you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all have the right to disagree and still get on with things and still get on with one another. I think that's important too. The
Yeah, I mean, listen to this story. Last year, the cancel culture, like this year they're canceling us. Last year they went after this band called Conservative Military Image, and CMI is a good band. They're really good, and people like them in the free marketplace of ideas. They sell a lot of records, and a lot of people go to their shows. And we put on the Beer Olympics last year is kind of like a reunion for the Beer Olympics, and so I put them on the bill, and it was great. They came and played a great show and everything like that. But like a week before the show, the cancel culture descended on CMI, and they said that the singer was a war criminal because he had been in the army and served in Afghanistan, and they were just going off about it, and they contacted myself and the venue that were putting the Beer Olympics on, and they were saying, if you guys have CMI on the Beer Olympics, you guys are racist Nazis too, and stuff like that. And I just said, look, I support your opinion, but the reason that you can have that opinion is somebody like the singer for CMI went and served in the country and defended it for you. And so you can have your opinion all day long, but I'm not taking them off the show. And they were like, "Oh, you racist commie, you Nazi, all this stuff. It's just bullshit." And I mean, it's just like not based in fact nonsense. So yeah, I 100% agree that everyone should have. I mean, and America has always been that way. America has always been the supporter of, or until the last maybe since the beginning of the military industrial complex has really marked the rapid decline of civil liberties in America. But in previous years, America has always been the have your opinion and walk with it kind of country.
Right, absolutely. And that's the country I want to see continue to exist.
Yeah,
Um,
I was in. Listen to this. I was in a taxi in Washington D.C. And since I travel a lot, I always ask people just out of the blue, hey, how's it going in Washington, or wherever I'm at. And so I get in the taxi and I ask this African American cab driver, how's it going? And he goes, good, and we start talking. I said, what's going on in DC? And we're talking. And somehow the conversation got around to there was a pause, and he goes, you know what? He goes, I want my America back that existed before 9/11.
mm,
And I went, I agree with that, brother. And that was, I remember I was visiting my parents. My parents were retired, and I was up visiting them when 9/11 happened. And my brother called and said, turn on the TV. There was just an airplane accident in New York City. And so we turned on the TV just as the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And I remember just going like, wow, because it obviously wasn't like a mistake. It wasn't an accident. And the first thing my dad said, who had 40 years of Secret Service, he goes, they're really going to have a field day with this one.
yeah.
So let that sink in, because his words were very prescient. What did happen after 9/11 was the military industrial complex got 20 years of war.
Hmm.
The Pentagon got 20 years worth of fat contracts, and America got defrauded.
Yeah. At the same time, I remember being in northern New Jersey at the time, but I was working right outside the Lincoln Tunnel. And I remember the weeks after 9/11. And this was before social media, obviously, just a few years before. And I remember how much of an effort everyone was making just to be cool to each other.
Right.
I would
I
take it
remember.
to New York, and there'd be an Arabic cab driver. He'd have a little post-it note in his car on an index card message saying, "Hi, I'm a legal immigrant in this country. I'm here to raise my children. I love America, and I'm here to help." You
Yeah,
know, and
I
everybody
remember.
very nice to each other. But had 9/11 happened today, within 10 minutes, there'd be more arguing over bullshit on
Right.
social media than there
Right.
would be checking in on your neighbors, making sure they're okay. You know,
Right.
how I view people. It's not the big issues about what do you think about Trump or Kamala Harris. Do you know your neighbor's name? You know,
Right.
do you know the people who run the restaurant in your small town if you live in one? Do you know the people who are on your town council? Are you involved in the school board? You know,
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Yeah, social media has isolated people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's making them focus on things that are so far away, they're ignoring what's in front of them, you know.
I agree.
So hopefully this conversation has shed some light on some things that, we've both seen happen on social media in the last few days with your band. As we wrap up, I wanted to ask you if there's anything that you wanted to mention on any of these topics that we haven't discussed.
I mean, I'm not a blowhard. I don't want to sit here and talk all day and pontificate. So I would just say, hey, thanks for taking the time to chat about an archival old band and a heavily censored one. And if anyone wants to check out the new videos we did that are all so censored that the psyop that you see in social media doesn't let you see them, you can go to www.theantiheroes.org and you can see all the videos. We're going to do some new videos as well. We're going to do one video for each song on the record. So we've got like 6 done so far. We're about to do one on the song called Bury My Heart at Tiananmen that's on the new record, which is all about our friends that got killed on June 4th, 1989 in the Tiananmen Square massacre. And that should be a pretty cool video, but that'll be out in about a month.
Excellent. And for those who may not know, that's Heroes without the E. It's HEROS.
That's right, because we were kids back then and we didn't know how to spell right.
Good. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking
So,
some.
well, cool. Well, thanks, Joel. I appreciate it. Yep. Yep. Thanks a lot.
And I would just conclude by telling anyone watching this video, the comments will be open on this video. If you have anything to say, please feel free to say it. However, I would make a request. If you do present an argument, counter anything Mark has said here, present it with the same thought and care that Mark has presented it here. I'm not going to tolerate blanket statements without any backing. Put some thought behind what you have to say, and you're always welcome to say it on my channel. And anyone who vehemently disagrees with anything Mark had to say, let me know. You're welcome to state your case as well. So I want to keep that door open.
And thanks for the support over the years to everyone. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Mark, we'll talk again soon, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.